Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me. Well, unless you have a child with autism, you probably didn't know that the month of April is Autism Awareness Month. It is estimated that a new case of autism is diagnosed every 20 minutes. In fact, more children will be diagnosed with autism this year than with AIDS, diabetes, and cancer combined. Joining me this morning to tell us what we all need to know about autism and those on the autism spectrum is Dr. Anthony Cammilleri, the director of the Jane Justin School, a department within the Child Study Center in Fort Worth. The Child Study Center is a nonprofit that provides diagnosis and treatment services to children who have or are at risk for developmental disabilities and related behavioral and emotional problems, such as autism. Joining Dr. Cammilleri are Melanie and Seth Fowler. Melanie and Seth's son, William, is a student at the Child Study Center. Plus, Melanie and Seth have written a book titled Look at My Eyes, which, as you may know, is a plea uttered by so many parents of children with autism. Plus, later in the program, I'll be joined by Martha Blaine. Martha's the executive director of the Community Council of Greater Dallas, a nonprofit that connects people with social services here in our area. Martha's going to join me to tell us about a great event that is coming up Saturday, April 30th at Dallas Market Hall. It's the Get Kids Fit Fest. Martha will tell us all about that coming up later in the program. But right now, let me welcome Dr. Anthony Cammilleri and Melanie and Seth Fowler. Guys, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Good morning, Anna.
Dr. Cammilleri, I'm going to start with you. As I mentioned, it is Autism Awareness Month. So what exactly is autism and what should people know about it?
Autism is a developmental disability that is considered to be a pervasive developmental disability, meaning that it pervades so very many aspects of a child's development, including language acquisition, cognition, the ability to socialize, motor skill development. It really does pervade all areas of a child's development. And what's often happening is that the child with autism is delayed in so very many areas. So we find ourselves in a race against time to try to do as much as we can as early as we can so that children with the diagnosis can have the best possible outcome.
What are the signs that parents should be on the lookout for?
The number one warning sign would be eye contact. Not surprisingly, that's featured very heavily in the title of Melanie and Seth's book. There was a study that was done many years ago that was trying to find what are the best predictors of possible autism, and eye contact kept coming back as the number one sign that you should be looking for. For example, in this particular study that they were looking at children from videotapes of their first-year birthday, and the observers were blinded to what the purposes of the study were, but they were able to figure out which children were more likely to have autism based upon the degree of social interaction and the amount of eye contact that they made during that first birthday party.
The autism spectrum encases so many things, from just simple speech delay to someone who cannot interact with people at all.
Yes, indeed. That's absolutely the truth.
So is that why we're seeing a rise in the number of cases of autism?
I think so. In recent years, the condition has been described in terms of a spectrum, and that has been helpful in many ways because it allows people to get their heads around the tremendous variability that exists within the condition, the tremendous variability with respect to the degree of delays in the various developmental domains. But I think it also is one of the contributing factors to why we're seeing what is considered to be an increase in the incidence of autism. What has happened is that there has been a broadening of the diagnostic criteria for inclusion in autism. So children who years ago wouldn't have been considered on the spectrum now are being included, and that's contributing to the rise in those numbers.
Seth and Melanie, your son William is a student at the Child Study Center. Tell me about William. When did you first realize that there was a problem, and how old is he now?
William is 5 years old now.
And when did you first realize that there was a problem with William, Melanie?
I would say a little after 12 months. After his first birthday, I started noticing that his development was just different. His speech was not progressing appropriately. His eye contact was definitely lacking, and also he was hand flapping, and he was not physically where he should be with his milestones. You know, walking, crawling, all of those milestones were just not there.
Did you immediately think, oh my gosh, my son may have autism?
No, I did not. At a little after 12 months of age, I thought, his speech isn't developing, let's just start with that. And then I would say after we started with ECI, early childhood intervention, we started seeing other signs, other symptoms that were leading to autism.
Seth, what about you? When did you say, okay, Melanie, we're going to have to do something here. We're going to have to look at what's going on and research and find a way to help our son?
Well, first of all, the biggest thing, I think we were in denial. And that was the hardest hurdle to overcome, because we probably deep down inside knew that something was, I don't want to say wrong, but different with William, that he wasn't developing typically. And that was hard for us because no parent wants to see their child in a different light. So once we kind of went past the denial and said, something is wrong, we need to do whatever it takes. Fortunately, Melanie has a background in speech pathology as well as a master's degree in deaf education. And so she had a few outlets that she knew to contact. And that's when we started making calls and getting on websites and just tirelessly looking for help, looking for answers.
So you guys were kind of ahead of the game because of Melanie's background. But denial, wouldn't you say, Dr. Cammilleri, being with the Child Study Center in Fort Worth, that a lot of parents have to go through that period of denial before they come to accept that their child needs help?
I don't know if they have to, but oftentimes they do. It is an obstacle that nearly 100% of the parents go through. I'm not involved in the actual diagnosis of autism. That's handled by our developmental pediatricians and our psychologists upstairs. But right after that diagnosis is made, oftentimes a child is sent down to the school. And I am charged with the responsibility of helping parents overcome that denial and helping them overcome their grieving so that they could get down to brass tacks and start doing what their child needs them to do so that they can start acquiring the skills that will enable them to lead a more typical life.
It's very important for parents to know you can grieve and be proactive at the same time. You don't have to choose one or the other.
That's very well said. I would like to use that. I think we should promote that more in the school.
Yeah, Dr. Cammilleri knows a good idea when he steals one, right?
Yes, indeed.
My guest once again this morning, Dr. Anthony Cammilleri, the director of the Jane Justin School, a department within the Child Study Center in Fort Worth, which provides instruction for children with developmental disabilities and learning differences. Also here in studio, Melanie and Seth Fowler, their son William, who is 5 years old, is a student at the Child Study Center, and they have recently written a book about their journey titled Look at My Eyes. April is Autism Awareness Month, so I figured this would be a great time to shine a light on autism, which is the fastest growing serious developmental disability in the U.S. Melanie, Seth, tell me about the book, Look at My Eyes. Obviously, you were inspired because of your son, William. What makes this book different, Melanie, say, from any other book on autism and the autism spectrum?
Well, I would say there are a few facets there that make it different. Number one, we have a father's perspective, which you don't see typically in a book about autism. I think it's important for both parents to be involved. In fact, I think it's necessary. So having a father's perspective was really quite important and unique. Also, there is a chapter that specifically talks about insurance coverage. And I would say that is very important, insurance coverage for applied behavior analysis, which is ABA therapy, which is the only scientifically proven method to help these children.
So you kind of help people navigate their way, once
Yes.
their child is diagnosed, navigate their way through all of the insurance problems that you guys encountered.
Yes, we talk about grief, early intervention, signs, symptoms. We discuss where to receive services. There are a lot of lists that you need to get on in order to receive services. It talks a little bit about navigating through that as well.
Seth, Melanie mentioned that this book, Look at My Eyes, is different because it gives your perspective. Tell me about the father's perspective of dealing with a child with autism.
Well, I think it's completely different from a mother's perspective, especially in our case. Melanie was around William, and she understood autism and the spectrum from her background, and I didn't. And when we understood more and more about William's condition, from a father's perspective, loss of expectation. And I think as a parent, your children are always going to not meet your expectations, but that's probably later on in life, at age 20, at age 25, whatever. From a dad's perspective, my expectations were blown out of the water immediately because of what William was struggling with and what he was faced with. So that was really hard, and I grieved and still grieve differently than Melanie. I wanted to go back to your question of what makes this book different as well. When we learned about William's situation, we were bombarded with magazines and books and all sorts of pamphlets that were very scientific, they were very opinionated, and they were big, they were thick. And the last thing a parent has time to do is to read a 300-plus page book on what causes autism. We don't care what causes autism. That's not the focus of this book. This book is, yes, this is the condition. Now how are we going to help our child, and what's the best avenue for that success? And every avenue is different. This is exactly what you have to do to have a successful autistic child book. This is, hey, these are our experiences. This is a lot of the work that Melanie has put into websites, insurance codes, helpful tips at home. And it's how do you help the child as quickly as possible and get on the path that is right for you and your child.
You wanted to add something, Melanie?
Debating the controversies of the use of vaccines, for example, that is something that's not in the book. At this point, when William was diagnosed, we wanted to know, where do we go from here? How do we help him? Because as a family, discussing what caused it can actually prevent you from being proactive. It can put you in a situation where you can become very depressed. It's just not a good place to be. So as a family, I would say, let the scientists work on the causes. We need to know what to work on in our daily lives on a day-to-day basis. We need to move forward.
And that's where the Child Study Center in Fort Worth and the Jane Justin School come into play. Dr. Cammilleri, tell me about the work that you do at the Jane Justin School.
I guess it boils down to two things. I help the teachers, help the students decrease problematic behaviors and increase behaviors that we want to see in children. That's really at its bare bones. Children with autism and a host of other developmental disabilities that we see in this school come to us with behavioral excesses, those behaviors that are obstacles to their learning. For example, some children come to us with high rates of stereotypy. They might flap their hands, they might look at objects very closely or get down on the floor and just look at the edge of them. And these are behaviors that are making the children stand out from their neurotypical peers. There are also behaviors that prevent them from engaging in more pro-social interactions. They also prevent them in some cases from engaging with academic materials. So every moment that's spent doing behaviors that are not really functional in the world, it's sort of like time lost. And if we know that a child with a pervasive developmental disorder comes to us already with skill deficit, that means that we're going to have to teach more in a given amount of time than would otherwise be expected by the calendar if we're going to start to close those skill gaps. So what we first do is try to look for what behavioral obstacles exist in the children, and then we try to remove them so that we can help these children reach their full potential.
If